Back to our symposium of die Gemeinschaft. Today we're here with Madeleine Coste and Yael Pantzer. Maybe you can wave quickly, Madeleine and Yael. They are both EU policy officers at Slow Food International's Brussels office, advocating for sustainable food policies. And slow food, maybe it's already familiar to you. It's a political movement that promotes good, clean, and fair food for everybody. And it has chapters all over the globe, including in Germany. But yeah, Madeleine and Yael are going to tell us more about it in a second. And yeah, today we're going to speak about current developments in the EU agricultural policy. We're going to speak about what happened this year and also what lies ahead.
Thank you so much, Carla, for the introduction, and thank you for inviting us to speak today. Indeed, you already said we're going to speak about EU food and agricultural policies, a topic that Slow Food has been now following for many years. I'm going to open my PowerPoint presentation. Okay, there we are. Okay, so we titled this talk today "Ways for a Better Agricultural Policy and Why We Cannot Stop Thinking Politically." So we have today a very interesting situation, the current political situation where there's a lot of changes that are happening both in food and agricultural policy. So we'll see a little bit what these changes are and how these policies are working together. So Yael and I are both policy officers in the European Office of Slow Food. The first thing I wanted to explain a bit is why do we have Slow Food Europe? So Slow Food, as Carla already said, is a global movement that was already founded 30 years ago now. And most of its work has been through grassroots projects, working with producers, mostly small-scale agroecological farmers, working with artisans, also working with cooks, and doing a lot of awareness raising with citizens as well. But Slow Food also realized that in order to really change and transform the food system to make it more sustainable and healthy, and so that everyone has access to food. Sorry, I'm getting a pop-up here. Okay. So in order to transform our food systems, we also need to work at the political level and transform the policy behind our food systems. So this is why Slow Food created an office, opened up an office in Brussels to work on advocating for different EU policies, both in food and agricultural policies. So our office is composed of 5 people. So we have 2 policy officers, our director, Marta Mesa, a communications officer, and a 5th colleague who is working on coordinating a coalition of NGOs based in Brussels. And with our small team, we monitor all of the EU policies that are pertaining to food and agriculture, which includes pesticides policies, GMOs, labeling, biodiversity policies, agricultural policies, animal welfare, etc. So we cover a wide range of topics, and every day we try to influence where we can to make them more sustainable and healthier. So I just wanted to give a very brief overview for those who don't know about how the EU works, because it's a bit of a complicated and daunting process, but it's actually not so complicated. But it's useful to know a little bit how it works, so that you also know where it is that Slow Food tries to intervene. So essentially, in Brussels, we have 3 big institutions. We have the European Commission, the Council, and the Parliament. The European Commission is the one that proposes legislation, and then it gets voted upon by the European Parliament, which is made of members of Parliament that we all elect every 4 years, and also the Council of the European Union, where it is actually the governments of each of our 28 and now 27 member states that get together. So all of our agricultural ministers are part of the Council of the European Union. And so the Parliament and the Council have to vote and decide whether they agree or not with the legislation that is proposed by the European Commission. And this also applies to all of the food and agricultural policies as well. This is a very brief overview of what has been happening over the last month, just to situate a little bit where we are in the EU policy cycle. So last year, in May 2019, I hope that we all went and voted for our members of parliament. So the people who go and represent us in Brussels, there's over 500, I think, members of parliament that were elected last year. The new members of parliament then elected the new president of the European Commission, who is now Ursula von der Leyen. And they started working in December 2019. And straight away they announced a new European Green Deal, which is essentially a new umbrella strategy, which is supposed to be to help the EU get into a more sustainable economy, essentially. And part of this European Green Deal, which is very exciting, and we were very happy to hear that it was going to be the new priority of the European Commission. Two strategies that were published within this European Green Deal a couple of months later in May are the Farm to Fork strategy and the biodiversity strategy. And together, these are two really important strategies that we have been following very closely because they really have the power to change the way that our European food system works. But alongside of this, alongside of these two new strategies, we still have the Common Agricultural Policy, which has been in place now for several decades, and which Yael will explain in a couple of minutes is undergoing a reform. And so in October, just a month ago, the European Parliament had to vote on this new Common Agricultural Policy reform. So essentially today we're going to talk a little bit about both the Farm to Fork strategy and the Common Agricultural Policy, they work and how they work together as well. So now I leave it to Yael for the first part on the Common Agricultural Policy.
Yes, hello everybody, I'm Yael Pantzer and I'm in charge of following the developments of the Common Agricultural Policy in our office. So I will maybe start by explaining a bit what this policy is and what does it mean. So you will often see the abbreviation actually of Common Agricultural Policy, which is CAP. We often talk about it like this, just to make it shorter. So basically, it is a very important policy just by thinking about the fact that it takes up to 38% of the entire European budget. If you think about it, it's a lot of money. And it means 58 billion of euros per year to support the agricultural production in the EU. This goes into the hands of farmers. So why do we have a common agricultural policy? So it was created in 1962. You have to think of a post-war Europe where food was really a problem. We were lacking food. And so this policy was one of the first common European policies created in order to support the production of food. We wanted to make sure that there would have been no famine and that everybody in the European Union could have access to cheap and quality food. So this was the first purpose of the Common Agricultural Policy, and it has worked quite well. If you think about it, we have an abundance of food in Europe, part of which is being exported and part of which is being wasted next to what is being eaten, of course. So there is not really a problem of food insecurity anymore. We're not lacking food production, but there are still people who suffer from food insecurity, and this is caused by access that they have to food rather than the existence of this food. So now the main point is how can we shift the common agricultural policy in a way that it is more adapted to the current challenges? How can we shift from thinking in a productionist way to thinking in a more environmental way? If you think about it, it's not only a problem of food waste, it's a problem of how this food is produced. We know that about 30% of greenhouse gas emissions are indeed caused by food production, which is specifically intensive food production, industrial food production, which means monocultures, pesticides, and so on. But where are we at with the process of the Common Agricultural Policy reform? Can you go to the next slide? Thank you. So basically, this policy is renovated and reformed every 7 years. It follows the European economic cycle. So basically, every 7 years, the European Union agrees on a budget for the coming 7 years. So we had a common agricultural policy from 2014 until 2020. And the next one should start in 2021 until 2027. So the reform proposal was tabled in June 2018, so now almost 2 years ago. This is because, as Madeleine explained, the process is it's quite long. So there is the Commission coming first with the proposal that is then being discussed by the European Parliament and by the European Council, who each want to see changes within the reform proposal. So this is why we had a proposal 2 years ago, and now we are working on it. Of course, civil society, which Slow Food as well represents, also wants to have a say in how the reform develops. So this is one of the main works that we are doing. So what are the main differences between the previous CAP and the current one, the one that will enter into force in 2021? So there has been the decision to have a more nationalized approach. So while before it was really a common agricultural policy with the same rules across the European Union, now the Commission has decided that we need something which is more adapted to the local context. So basically, every member state has to come up with a national strategic plan, which indeed will explain how they will implement the common rules in the national context. So it gives somehow some flexibility, even though there are some common goals. But what is most important is that for the new common agricultural policy, there is now a different panorama. So again, I would like to stress the fact that the proposal came in 2018, and the new Commission and the new Parliament just started and took office last year. So over 1 year after the proposal was tabled. So what does this mean? That they came up with a Green Deal, but the common agricultural policy reflects a policy environment that was before that. We have, I think, much more attention now to environmental issues. We are all aware that there is a climate crisis, but the problem is that the common agricultural policy reform does not reflect this. So this is one of the main issues that we're working on right now. If you go to the main slide, so here I will just summarize some examples through those graphics, which show how our industrial system is kind of broken and is going into the wrong directions. For example, here you can see how the number of farms is decreasing and their size is actually increasing. So we have less and less farms with a bigger size. And this is one of the consequences of how this CAP is structured, which is basically it gives subsidies, it gives its money per hectare. This means that the larger the holding that you have as a farmer, the more money you will get. So this is it incentivizes the expansion of farms, as well as the loss of the overall number of farms. So this means a more industrialized agricultural system. So this is just one of the consequences. And if you see in the next slide, another of the consequences is the loss of overall biodiversity. This is because, as I explained, the larger the holding, the more we tend to go into monocultures, into really industrial type of agriculture. Here you can see the number of birds declining. It is not only the number of birds. Birds are considered to be a proxy for their overall biodiversity. There will be less birds if there are less insects. There will be less birds if there is less nature where they can live on. So it is really a very clear sign of the loss of biodiversity. And if you go to the next slide, we see here the sale of pesticides across Europe. We have some nice cases in which indeed the sales of pesticides has been decreasing, and those are the ones in green. But we see many cases in which the sale of pesticides is actually increasing, and this is the ones in red. So one of the main issues here is that there is not a real coordination at the moment on a European level to reverse the use of pesticides. Some member states are doing better, some others are doing worse. So we will see how then the policies are trying to change this tendency. So then if you go to the next slide. Thank you, Madeleine. We see also that research shows that EU agriculture is not on the right track to meet the Green Deal targets. This means that we are going into a direction with one policy, but with the other, we are actually financing the wrong type of agriculture. So indeed, industrial production, monoculture, chemical pesticides, and fertilizers are all a cause of this problem. This is why the European agriculture is not on the right track. So to reverse this, we would need a common agricultural policy that has a stronger conditionality. For example, which would give subsidies and money only to those farmers who meet certain standards. It would need some eco-schemes, like stronger eco-schemes. There are eco-schemes, but they're not strong enough. We would really need subsidies that support agroecological practices, and in general, subsidies to those farmers who have practices that are also beneficial for the climate change and for the environment. And very importantly, we would need very legally binding targets. So like clear rules that only according to those we could really support farmers who follow those rules. And then I will leave the floor to Madeleine, who maybe on a more positive note can show us how we can go into this direction.
Thanks, Yael. So indeed, now I'm going to talk about the second policy, which is the farm to fork strategy. So like I said before, it is part of the European Green Deal. So on the right, you can see all of the different policies that are going to make up this new European Green Deal, which also includes policies on transport, on energy, on circular economy, etc. So the farm to fork strategy, like its official title, is for a fair, healthy, and environmentally friendly food system, which is of course something that Slow Food is very interested in. It is a 10-year strategy. It's a strategy. It's not a law. That means it's not actually binding yet. But the farm to fork strategy is the first EU policy to really take a food systems approach. So meaning that we're looking at a strategy that proposes measures for all along the food chain. So it's no longer just agriculture, but it's also looking at consumption, at demand, at retail, at food waste, etc. So it's supposed to be a very holistic approach. And essentially, its goal is to accelerate the transition towards a sustainable food system. So it's also good and impressive, let's say, that the European Commission is now using these terms, you know, the sustainable food system. They also talk about things like the food environment. So these are also terms that are very now, you know, that Slow Food and other NGOs have been calling for a long time. It's good to see them reflected in EU policies now. So the farm to fork strategy includes an action plan with 27 very concrete measures that it says will pave the way for a greener food production, as well as healthier and more sustainable diets and less food waste. And the strategy includes proposals for legislative reform or proposals for new legislation. So very, very briefly, some of the way that we analyze some of these measures, some of them are quite good, and some we have some reserves. But overall, I have to stress the fact that this farm to fork strategy is very much welcome by a lot of NGOs and civil society organizations in Brussels and also across the EU. So the reason why it's been so welcome is firstly because it has a couple of quite ambitious targets. So, for example, the target to reduce the use and risk of pesticides by 50% by 2030. It also aims to curb obesity. It aims to reduce the sales of antimicrobials by 50% in both livestock and aquaculture. It aims to increase organic production to 25% by 2030, compared to 7% today, so that's quite an increase. It also proposes to revise animal welfare legislation, reduce fertilizer use by 20%. It talks about the need to improve food environment, meaning they want to make the access to healthy and sustainable food easier by playing on the food environment that influences the way that we eat. It also proposes strengthen food labeling. Sorry for the typo there. It actually proposes several different measures, different reforms of food labeling, including on origin, on front of pack nutritional labeling, and also on geographical indications. And it also proposes new criteria for public procurement. So, for example, the food in canteens and hospitals, etc. And it has a reduction target of 50% on food waste. Very briefly, because I think we're a little bit behind on time, but some of the negatives is, for example, that there's a European Citizens Initiative, which is a petition, essentially, at the European level called Save Bees and Farmers that Slow Food supports, which actually goes further and calls for an 80% reduction target of pesticides. Also, the farm to fork strategy makes allusion to new GMO techniques, saying that they could help to accelerate the transition to sustainable food systems, which is something that Slow Food is very much against. It also doesn't include any target on the reduction of meat, eggs, or dairy, doesn't give enough emphasis on agroecology, nor does it differentiate between different types of production in livestock or even crops to a certain extent. They don't mention very much farm workers. And one of the big things is also that it really still kind of relies too much on individual behavior. So on the need for individual consumers to change the way that they consume food, rather than really enacting binding legislation to change the way that food is produced and distributed. And overall, also not enough about the impact of the EU food production on the rest of the world. And we'll get back to this now, but essentially, a lot of the farm to fork strategy will depend also on the CAP itself, which we will see is quite an issue. So Yael, I think this is now up to you again.
Yes, so I think if you have a look at this picture, it is really symbolic. You see the broccoli called farm to fork, and the potato called the Common Agricultural Policy, and a sign towards nature-friendly farming. It's clear that the CAP, the Common Agricultural Policy, doesn't want to go there. The farm to fork is trying to lead. It's not super easy though. And behind you can see monoculture. So this is a bit the direction towards which we're going. There is the Common Agricultural Policy, which is old and fat in a way. And then there is the farm to fork, which is trying to pull towards a more sustainable food system, which is also in harmony with nature. So I will maybe talk you through some of the recent developments and what we have tried to do in order to reach this goal, to have the Common Agricultural Policy following the farm to fork. As I mentioned already before, the timing was not great because the reform proposal came before the farm to fork, before the biodiversity strategy, before the Green Deal. So this already was quite hard. On the 30th of September, this is just one of the examples of the actions that we carry out. On the 30th of September, we sent a letter to the President of the European Commission, the President of the European Parliament, and the President of the Council, which are the three main institutional bodies of the European Union, the ones that really take the decision. And we asked in this letter, we signed with over 30 other civil society organizations from all over Europe, representing hundreds of people and hundreds of other organizations under them. We asked for a clear alignment of the CAP with the Green Deal objectives. So what we wanted to see really is the Green Deal targets, because as Madeleine showed, there are really clear targets. We have 50% reduction in pesticides. We have like clear numbers there, which is great achievement. We would have liked to see them in the reform proposal. So we were asking for the vote which happened in October, for the Parliament to actually include those targets in the Green Deal, in the CAP. We asked as well to stop subsidizing farming practices which have negative environmental, climate, health, or international development impacts, such as intensive animal production. Here you can think about the fact that what we produce in Europe doesn't only have effects in Europe. For example, intensive animal production depends a lot on soy production that happens in South America, and so this causes deforestation, exploitation of local people, massive use of pesticides. So like a lot of consequences of the industrial agricultural system in Europe have also consequences in third countries. And then we asked to dedicate sufficient and qualitative funding to incentivize and reward farmers who deliver on the objectives of the European Green Deal. So let's say that those were our main asks. We asked this at the end of September, just ahead of the vote in the Parliament. It didn't go as expected, or maybe it was expected, but it didn't go well, basically. The vote that went through, it's basically a business as usual approach, so a very conservative way of dealing with the climate crisis. The reform has not changed in its core, and the most important thing is that the Green Deal targets have not been explicitly included in the Common Agricultural Policy. So what this means is that 40% of the European budget is not tied to any environmental or very low environmental requirement, and this is a huge problem, because we have some very good political targets which are in the Green Deal, but we need instruments to implement them, and the Common Agricultural Policy would have been the main instrument to implement it. So this is a bit of a loss, but of course we keep on asking those things in different ways. We will, of course, work a lot, and we invite you as well to work a lot on the national level, because as I said, one of the main changes of the Common Agricultural Policy is that every member state has to come up with a national plan. So this is where we can still ask for those objectives to be included. And so here it comes the slide on how can we actually influence the political process that has to do with food and agriculture, but more in general, if you have a specific cause that you want to fight for, those are the main ways that we use, and we invite everyone. The first one is to build the cooperation with other organizations, because civil society is a multitude, but we need to be organized, and the more we are, the better it is. So whenever you can, if you find you have a common goal with someone else, work jointly on that. Another one is mobilizing citizens, so informing them about the political process and making sure they actually fight for the same cause as well. One of the main examples of a campaign that we have been running, that we keep on running, is the Good Food, Good Farming campaign. Another of the ways that we have to influence the process is sending joint letters. We need to make sure that we have a dialogue with institutions, and they have they must listen to civil society, and so sending the letters is a great way. Online pressure, so really making sure that when we have political demands, we do tag decision makers. What else? Other ways could be to ask and obtain meetings with institution representatives. These can happen at several levels. We have the European levels, but we also have the national, the regional, and even the local. So if you want to change something on the local level, make sure that you go and you speak with your local representative. At Slow Food, for example, we organize many events. The main one is Terra Madre Salone del Gusto, which is currently running online due to the pandemic, of course. But in general, organizing events, inviting citizens, decision makers, and experts, and building a dialogue in the event is a great way. European Citizen Initiative, so a petition, which we mentioned before, Save the Bees and the Farmer is one of them. So this is a great way as well. The European Citizen Initiative specifically, it's a petition that is organized and in a way hosted by the European Commission. So it's a system embedded in the European Commission that allows for those petitions to run. And as always, pressure at national and or local level, being interested in the political process and make sure that your voice is heard. And then maybe I will, I wanted to show you in the next slide a very concrete example of pressure and public interest. Thank you, Madeleine. So what has happened lately, and we're very happy about it, is that there is an increasing attention of civil society on issues linked to agriculture and climate change. And here you can see a tweet from Greta, who I think you all know from Fridays for Future, asking to vote this cap down. This was just during the week of the vote at the Parliament. And as I explained, unfortunately, many of the Green Deal targets were not included. So this meant that it would be really hard to reverse the climate crisis. And so Greta and in general, the Fridays for Future gave a great support, a great hand in raising public attention on the issue of the common agricultural policy, which is something that normally sounds quite boring, but it is relevant, let's say, for all of us. And I think I will conclude here. If you can switch to the next slide. Okay. So here you can see our main Twitter accounts. If you want to follow the political developments and the work that we are doing, make sure that you follow us. Our Twitter account is Slow Food Europe, but then you can have the Slow Food headquarters account, the Slow Food Germany. We have a great network and a great organization of slow food in Germany, and the youth account, which is as well very active on the political level. And then I would like to invite you all as well, if you want to be updated on slow food activities all over the globe, to sign up to our newsletter, which is now shared also in the chat. And then, of course, I would like to thank you for inviting us. And if you have any questions, we will be more than happy to answer.
Yes, thank you so much, Yael and Madeleine. Sorry, you wanted to say something, Madeleine?
No, just to warn that my connection is very bad.
Yeah, I saw your video went off in between, but yeah, for the moment we can still hear you. Now we can't see you, but yeah, as long as we hear you, I guess it's okay. So if you want to ask any questions, feel free to type them in the chat, or also to turn on your video and your microphone and ask them directly. Yeah, so otherwise I have a few lined up. So I wanted to know if maybe you can tell us a bit more about your work in Brussels and also what your background is. As in, how do you become a lobbyist for better food? What do you have to do to get there?
It's a very good question. Maybe I can start while Madeleine's connection gets better. we have quite a different profile, so I think it would be interesting for you to hear as well the different experiences and how we got there. Of course, I'd say the main point would be interest. So the interest in the topic is what keeps you fighting for. It should be embedded. It should be your values, basically. So my background, I have a bachelor in development economics and international cooperation, which I got at the University of Florence, where I'm from. And then I got a master's in food anthropology. So I'd say it's quite a mix between politics, anthropology, and food. And I didn't start right away working on policy. I actually started working in the food chain on several levels. I was a cheesemonger at some point. I was the head of a cheese and ham department in a shop. So I really experienced there, let's say, the retail level as well as the producers level, in the sense that I was really into the food chain. And it was really an interesting experience for me to understand also the more commercial side as well as the production side. And after that, I started working for Slow Food, which I always looked at as like representing really my main values. I started working for Terra Madre, and then I got more and more involved into policy issues and moved to the Brussels office, where I do, let's say, both lobby work, but as well coordination work in some of the countries for slow food. So what is really important for what we do in Brussels, I think, is that we don't speak for ourselves. We speak for the Slow Food Network, of course. So we are there representing farmers, representing cooks, representing experts, representing food businesses. So this is really important to remember. It's not that we come up with our theories on what is good and what is bad in policy, but we really try to take very concrete examples, take the voices of the farmers and bring them to Brussels.
Madeleine, you want to add?
And maybe I can. Yes, let's see if my connection is good enough. Let me know if you can't hear me. But yes, I have a bit of a different background as Yael. I first studied in business, actually, so really a completely different field, but was always interested in the climate issue and in food, and so I wanted to redirect my let's say career, very early career, and I did a master's of food policy at the City University of London, which is a very interesting master's that really talks and teaches about food systems and holistic food policies, and how you can only really achieve a sustainable food system by working on all of the different parts of the food system, essentially. And so that's why it's so interesting to be working at Slow Food, which is already an organization that really views food in its entirety, that works with lots of different actors of the food chain and of the food system. And it's really exciting to be working in Brussels at the moment, where this is really when exciting things are happening with this food systems approach. And to answer your question about what we do in our office kind of every day, I think, I mean, Yael already covered a lot of the ways in which we try to influence policy. But maybe something to re-emphasize is that we work a lot with other NGOs from that also work in food, but from different angles. So, for example, we work with animal welfare organizations or environmental organizations, also public health organizations, some that specialize in corporate lobbying, some that represent consumers. So, for example, the European Consumer Organization. And so we work all together as part of a coalition called the Food Policy Coalition. You can go and check out their website, because you can see, just to give you an idea of all of the different types of organizations that are part of this coalition. There's over 50 of them, I think. And we don't always come up with joint positions on everything, but together we really work together to try to have a really food systems approach to food policy making, and to point out to the EU decision makers how they can strengthen a part of their policy by, for example, taking into more consideration the animal welfare aspect, or more, the farm workers aspect, etc. So we work a lot in collaboration with other NGOs.
And how has this changed during COVID and lockdown? Because I guess it's already hard enough to get to know what happens behind closed doors. When everything is online, is it nearly impossible? Or how do you feel your job has changed in the past months?
Maybe I can start. I don't feel like it's changed too much the way that we're working, or at least I don't think that it has weakened the way that we're working. I mean, everything has moved online. The European Commission and the European Parliament meetings have all moved online. So in a way, it's almost more transparent, and it also allows for more people to participate. The rhythm has not slowed down, which is something that I think some people could say, yeah, during COVID, things really slowed down. I don't think it was the case for Brussels. But one interesting thing, I think a really good positive note for us is that we try to organize conferences from time to time to influence policy making. So where we invite people from the Commission or the Parliament, for example, and where we can talk about slow food views and our ideas. And what was really great with moving everything online is that we got to invite farmers a lot more easily than had we had to bring them into Brussels, where it's very difficult for farmers to take out 1 or 2 full days on the farm to come to Brussels and just for a 1 hour or 2 hour conference. In this sense, we were able to organize 2 or 3 events, I think, with really high level officials. And we had farmers from Germany, from Italy, really talk about agroecology. Last week, we had someone from near Munich who was talking about biodiversity on his land and biodiversity in soil, and he literally brought soil in front of the camera and was showing us. So that's something that probably would not have happened in Brussels if he had to come physically to the meeting.
Yeah, I watched that talk. I saw it too. And so speaking of representation, how do you usually manage to draw in all of the voices from, I guess, all over Europe? Because Slow Food is already a very interdisciplinary network, so it's already big on the national level, but how do you manage to coordinate all of that, and to know from all these different situations all across Europe?
Maybe Yael, as you're involved in the network?
Yeah. So let's say we have different ways of consulting the network, but we start from a very solid base, which is our policy briefs or policy papers. Basically, when there is a topic that is becoming very relevant or that is relevant for slow food, we normally write down policy papers where we state our main priorities and our main ideas, and those are circulated among our network in order to approve, amend them, and so on. And once the paper is approved, let's say that this is our reference document for that specific issue. So this is a way to have a shared document and a shared truth, let's say. Another way, of course, if there is a very specific issue, we can always count on our network of practitioners as well as experts. So, for example, if there is a very specific issue on animal welfare and we don't have that included in our policy brief, then we would make sure that we speak with the right people in our network that we know are experts on animal welfare, and we will try to as well talk with our farmers who have the at-hand experience. Because one of the tricky things of policy is that it has the risk of being detached from reality. This is something that we really try to overcome and to close the gap. Policy making is made of very nice ideas sometimes, but is not in touch with reality. And especially when we speak about sustainable agriculture, agroecology, and so on, we are being said that, for example, is not economically sustainable, or it cannot feed the world because the population is growing, and those are alternatives way of producing food, but it's not something that could go on a major scale in a way. So it is very, very important in this sense that indeed we give the voice to our farmers, and that we show and we demonstrate with facts that those systems are actually possible. And then on other issues, we also have somehow a political group, so people that in agreement somehow have been selected in Europe to represent different regions of Europe, and that we can consult when there is a specific political problem, and we have to have a very quick response. So we have our political reference across Europe that can guide us or help us or support us when we have to make some very quick political choices. Because sometimes it looks that policy goes slow, but some other times you really have to take a decision from one day to the other. Like if you have to take a decision or a position on a specific topic which you have not discussed before, you must make sure that you say something, because if you say the day after, it might be not relevant anymore.
Yeah, and also something I found interesting was I met with Martin Häusling last year, who's maybe you probably know him. He's a member of the EU Parliament for the Green Party, and he's a farmer. And he was saying that I forgot the number, but there's only like 3 or 4 farmers in the EU Parliament because it's so hard to concile these 2 jobs. Yeah, so I guess the professional background of EU members of parliament is, the opposite of diverse, I guess.
Yeah, I can't really speak to how many there are today, but there's also, I mean, I think those who manage to still remain active farmers is, of course, incredibly difficult. And there's some that have been working or with very large agri-cooperatives, for example, and those are unfortunately also the ones that are that are in the agricultural committee making most of the decisions about agriculture. So indeed, in that committee, there are very few, let's say, small-scale agroecological farmers, if any.
So moving on a bit to the new CAP, and by the way, to our participants, you're welcome to ask your questions also. So did I understand it right that the biggest proportion of EU subsidies is still linked to the size in hectares?
Yes, that's correct. Okay. This is one of the main issues alongside many other issues, but indeed, payments and subsidies. So the first thing, maybe I didn't mention it clearly enough before, but the biggest portion of the common agricultural policy goes into pure income support. So I'm paying you to live, basically. And the quantity of money, the amount of money, is based on the number of hectares that you possess and you cultivate. So indeed, the larger you're holding, the more money you will get. And of course, this causes as well a great disproportion in the way that money is being distributed. Because if you think about it, it's a lot of money, and it would make a huge change in agriculture and how this is distributed. And you could actually make change. You have the economic power of making this change, but this is about, again, how this money is distributed, what are the criteria. And in this sense, we end up having 20% of the beneficiaries, so 20% of the people getting the money, own the 80% of the, 20% of the beneficiaries get 80% of the money. So it's a huge share. The highest share, and this is of course also in a way not fair to all those small scale farmers or medium scale farmers who get less money, even though they practice in a much more environmentally friendly way. They do what we call ecosystem services. So it's not only that they produce food, but the way in which they produce food also helps preserving nature, preserving the environment, does not pollute, and defends biodiversity. So they provide this, they keep the water clean, they keep the soil fertile. It's not only that they produce food, but they provide those ecosystem services that often industrial agriculture doesn't do, actually does the opposite. So it pollutes, it destroys biodiversity, and on top of that, they're getting paid more. So it really doesn't make much sense how the system is being built right now. It's a policy that was created over 60 years ago, and of course now it's time to change. But there are strong powers at play there that want to keep things as they are, want to make sure that big corporations and big, let's say, farmers, like industrial farmers, still get the money that they have been used to get so far. It's not easy to change the system, like from one day to the other. I'm saying, no, you don't have the right to receive income anymore. Why so? And often as well, we have to think that people that work on those farms are not the ones getting the money. It's the owner of the farm who gets the money. It's not the person working on the farm necessarily. The farm worker actually have very low rights, and this is also another problem, like the exploitation that happens on a farm level. This is one of the only things that actually has been voted positively at the parliament. So in theory, farm workers should have more rights, but we will see again how this would be implemented.
And so how is it possible that on the one side you have this very progressive Green New Deal and the farm to fork strategy, and on the other side you have this cap, which doesn't really match up to this level of ambition? Is it because, as you said, the cap was proposed already a while ago, 2 years ago, or is this a normal phenomenon?
I think, it's an interesting question, and it really makes you think, like, why is it so incoherent? I think that is something that's important to note, is that we need to have coherence between all these different policies. And I think, exactly like Yael already said before, it really comes down to the fact that the cap reform was proposed in 2018 with the old commission, and it was not, and it has taken basically at least I think it's like 2.5 years now to get to the point where it was voted by the European Parliament. In the meantime, there was a big shift in the new people at the Commission, this new agenda of the European Green Deal, the need to really transform the way that we are living in Europe in a more sustainable way. I think what is surprising, though, is that there was kind of a talk about a green wave when there was the European elections of the members of parliament. There was an increase in the number of Green party and members of parliament. There was a decrease in the EPP, so the center-right party. And so there was, at least last year, a kind of new hype around the European Parliament that we thought was going to be greener. What's really disappointing is the way that they voted on this cap, because they could have taken this old cap proposal from the European Commission and they could have improved it. They could have added new amendments. The Green Party proposed many amendments that could have made the cap a lot better. But in fact, what was really disappointing is that they voted down all of these new green ideas, and they made the new cap essentially almost worse than what the Commission proposed. And that's really where there's a lot of disappointment, and where we see that the system isn't working very well. I mean, there was an agreement between 3 big parties, essentially. And yeah, a lot of probably also the result of a lot of lobby efforts from big agri-cooperatives, from pesticide industry as well, that didn't want to see very high targets or legally binding targets on pesticide reduction, etc. So a very disappointing CAP vote, but we can still be hopeful that things can evolve because, as Yael said, and I'll just finish on this, it's now up to member states to produce new national strategic plans, and now it means that we all have to try to put pressure on our national government to have really ambitious plans. We can do this right now. It's really at this moment that this is happening. Of course, some countries are more progressive and more ecological oriented than others, but where we can, we should try to make a difference there now.
I also see a question in the chat about that. Frida, you want to ask it directly, or otherwise I can, because
sure. I mean, of course, we're all in a bubble as well, right? But also, if you look at questionnaires to society, whether it's in Germany or in other countries, it seems like the wishes what society wants in their agricultural and food policy is to go to a more sustainable agriculture and towards that way. How is it that there's such a big gap in the policy, and that and that there's apparently no power from society itself? And then maybe a follow-up question on that: how can we also, first of all, of course, as a consumer, what can you do? But also as us as like an NGO, do you think, when you say like putting pressure on, what exactly do you mean by that? And are there like things where you can sign up, or where you can sign something, or what did you mean with putting pressure on exactly?
Yeah, maybe I can answer the first part. I think one of the big reasons why the wishes of civil society aren't well met, at least in this CAP reform, is, I mean, in Brussels, for example, the media and also politicians like to always pitch kind of farmers on one side and then environmental organizations on the other. So they're really seeing like environmental NGOs as wanting to impose new rules on farmers, banning pesticides and not caring at all about what farmers' needs are and about their livelihoods. And so they have a really easy argument to just say, okay, well, yes, we want more green measures, but you have to balance them with what farmers want. And that's where Slow Food has a really interesting role, because it's not true that all farmers want less environmental measures. Some of them would really like to see more support given to more ecological farming, and therefore that means imposing new rules or fairer rules to make it easier for farmers to really get money and support for more ecological farming. So I think the work that we need to do is also to really make it clear that there's a different way of farming that is feasible, like economically sustainable as well. Small-scale farming is a way to, it is financially feasible and it's good for the environment, it's good for health as well. And so it's about convincing a lot of people that are stuck in the old paradigm, convincing them that it's possible to move to this new system. So that's on the first part of your question. And then you were talking about how do we actually put pressure on national governments. Maybe Yael, you could mention good food, good farming, or other ways.
Yeah, maybe just to add to what you were saying. I think in general, what should change is having a philosophy that polluters pays, and you're paying to do public good, which is not happening right now. So right now we are giving money to polluters. This is just one of the points. And the other point, what do we mean by putting public pressure? It's very simple. Because it is a political process and because we vote our representatives in our institutions, we basically choose who is in power. And so when we point out at things that we don't agree for or things that we didn't vote for, as you say, like we society has clearly showed through the votes that there was a green wave, the youth voted, there is a big attention to the environment, but the policy processes actually don't reflect that. You're basically shaming them publicly. If you follow the political process and you say that environment is not being taken into consideration, and you publicly shame them, you publicly put pressure on them, you make a post and you tag them, you send a letter and so on, and you make noise around it, you make a demonstration, you're going to organize an activity and so on, they will feel the pressure because they are being elected by citizens. So like at the next round, they want to be elected. They won't have as much voters as they had before. So like for them, it's really important to be supported by voters. And in this sense, this is the public pressure that you can put. Indeed, we organize these, every year we organize this public campaign called Good Food, Good Farming, where we really try, first of all, to make citizens aware of the policy process, because I know it can sound a bit boring or far, let's say, from our reality, but it actually concerns us all. And this is the first message that has to come along. And the second one is, what are they doing in order to reach the policy objectives that they have put in their own plans? It's not that we came up with them. They had the plan, we voted for the plan. If the plan is not being enforced, is not being put into place, I'm not going to vote you next time. So this is the biggest leverage that civil society has.
Very interesting. And also the other day I was talking to someone who's, or it was in a politics class, and he was saying that actually we are moving very fast on the ecological questions. It's just that the temporality of politics is such that normally it takes decades. When you look at civil rights movements or other issues, it really took decades to get them and it's still not perfect. And he was saying that actually we are moving quite fast on the ecological questions. It's just that it's still not fast enough for the crisis that we are in. I don't know if you have thoughts on that, on if the system is actually able to change fast enough.
I think ideology, as you say, I think is going indeed very fast. I think even faster than we expected. We didn't expect such a farm to fork or such a Green Deal. And then we saw it and we were happy to see it. Political processes go slower than that, I think. And one of the main reasons is, yes, citizens are concerned by sustainability and so on, but in general, they have less instruments to really understand what's going on. And also, you normally vote a decision maker according to the short-term results that he brings. So if an ecological transition might take 10, 15, 20 years and is not well perceived in general, like as Madeleine said, farmers are saying that the environment and farmers are two opposite things, basically. And if you basically have a short-term economic approach, you will think that actually the current system is better because it provides cheap food for everyone and it's all fine. But then, and so the politician will invest more on that rather than saying, yeah, but in 20 years, you will have an environmentally sustainable agriculture and the system will be different. Often politicians have a more short-term side. They want to make sure that in 3-4 years they get voted. They don't really, I'm speaking very generally, but they won't see the consequences of what happens in 20 years, basically. They see consequences in 3-4 years that it is a short time. So they often prefer giving priority to economic terms rather than ecological, environmental terms, which might take longer to be seen, basically.
And so my last question, there is one question in the chat. So it goes a bit in the direction I wanted to take. I wanted to speak more about the national strategies to end it there. And so Gilles Wagner has a question. Gilles, if you want to ask it directly, feel free to turn on your camera and your microphone. Otherwise, I can also read it aloud. So Gilles was asking, are there positive examples of countries in Europe moving faster on ecological issues than, for example, Germany?
I think that's a really difficult question for me and Yael to answer because we're really focusing at EU level policies, unfortunately. I mean, I think we all have examples of positive things that are happening in different countries, but there's clearly no one country doing everything right. I think that's something that we can clearly say. So we have some positive examples in Denmark, for example, about public procurement. Agroecology in France is quite advanced, at least the notion, and politicians are quite let's say, interested in agroecology. In Germany, I know that, for example, one indicator that's very positive is that the demand for organic food is very, very fast increasing. So I think there's lots of different positive examples out there. But I couldn't say which countries are the ones that are best suited. But I can maybe point to you a very interesting document which we already referenced in the PowerPoint, actually, with 3 infographics. It's called the Agricultural Atlas, and it was produced by, sorry for my horrible German, but the Heinrich Böll Foundation. And you can find in this atlas, it's really great because it gives a great overview about the state of EU agriculture in general, and then also per country. And so there you'll be able to find lots of really interesting numbers and on very different aspects of agriculture. I can send the link now so that you have it.
Yeah, thank you. And also we will share, of course, all of these recommendations and also how to get involved in our app. There's a page for further reading and listening where, we're going to share everything after the talk. And so, I wanted to ask one final thing is that I read an analysis of this new cap, which was where the author was a bit afraid of the fact that maybe now, since the EU members have such a big responsibility in defining national strategies, maybe it's going to be like a competition for the lowest possible standards, environmentally speaking. Do you think that's something that could happen, or who is going to examine, is it going to be examined if these national strategies are fit for purpose or not?
Yeah, to your first question, yes, I think that is really a risk because it's going to be difficult for a country to say, okay, we're going to go ahead and actually, set a target of reducing pesticide use by 80%. So if France does this, but for example, Italy says puts the target at 50%, it's possible that it's going to be really difficult for French farmers to compete with the price of Italian food if it's cheaper to produce food with pesticides. So unless you really set the bar straight for everybody, it's going to be difficult for the governments to go that step further and implement tougher rules, because it's really possible that their farmers are going to lose out and it's going to be cheaper for consumers to buy food that comes from somewhere else. Because at the end of the day, most consumers still really buy food based on price. So yeah, I think this race to the bottom is really a risk, and that's why right from the start, when the Commission announced that it was going to allow for this national flexibility, there was already a lot of warnings from civil society organizations that this is really a step down because of this risk. And yes, the Commission is supposed to revise and accept the national strategic plans. So first, they're going to issue recommendations to the individual member states on what should be included in the national strategic plan, and then they have to approve it.
Mm-hmm. And that's going to take place 2021. I'm
not entirely sure, but I see Yael nodding, so yes.
Yes. So basically now it's a back and forth process. So basically now the European Commission has or is about to send mid-December country-specific recommendations. So basically, they will send to every member state recommendation on how to draft their national strategic plans based on the national context. So the European Commission has made an analysis of what's going on in that specific country, and according to that, they will set out recommendations. And then throughout next year, basically, every member state will have to submit their national strategic plan to the Commission, which can, of course, amend it, ask for change, approve it, not approve it, and so on. Yeah.
Okay.
And maybe just a last note, because we were speaking about indeed the CAP starting in 2021. This is actually not true. In theory, it should start in 2021. In practice, we're still in the process of drafting those national strategic plans. So it has been approved a 2-year transition. So basically, current rules will go on until 2022, and only from 2023 we will have the new CAP in place working.
Okay, so yeah, thank you so much. That was a really helpful insight into this new CAP, and yeah, thank you so much for all the clarity on these different strategies and topics and names you hear all the time. So yeah, as I said, we're going to share everything you mentioned in our app, and thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. And introduce a bit of Slow Food's work to our participants.